Welcome back at 8:08 exactly, news and views on Salam Media. And now we're looking at the issue around minimum wages. We understand that government is proposing an increase to the minimum wage, which we are told could see already skyrocketing unemployment worsen. That, of course, is according to the National Employers Association, NEASA, and the chief executive Mr. Gerard Pappenvis is online to talk to us about that issue. A very good morning to you, Gerard. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Julie. Good morning to you and to your listeners.
Thank you indeed for being with us on the show this morning. We know that this has been a really a sore issue in the side of government, but of course, we as employers also have a serious issue because we're being hit from all sides. The issue of rising costs of, well, almost everything. The issue with the rolling blackouts. Of course, we've had a bit of a reprieve with fuel prices coming down, but we shouldn't, take that for granted because perhaps in a month or two, the fuel prices will be going up again. So we have these sort of issues playing out here in South Africa. And over and above all of that, we are now faced with a increase or a proposed increase in the minimum wages. And I guess it's going to impact households as well, because a lot of us do have domestic help. So, where and how do you see this playing out? And what's the impact going to be like if that 8% proposed increase does come into effect?
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for having me. First of all, and as employers, we're not arguing. We are, as employers representatives, we're not arguing for abuse of workers and low wages. That's not the point. But you can make a minimum wage whatever you want to, but the determining factor is the ability of the employer to pay. So they are vulnerable employers that is required to pay minimum wage. If you look at households, the person that is paying the wage of the domestic is also an employee of somebody else. And he is subject to other constraints. So can he afford it? If you're looking at a farmer that's using low-skilled workers, for instance, in harvesting season, and he's using thousands of them, and that is happening, an increase of 300 or 400 rand a day for 1,000 people, all of a sudden means 400,000 rand. So he needs to adapt the moment that happens. Can he afford it? Must he mechanize? What do we do? So you see, the market is a thing. It is difficult to predict how the market will respond because it is thousands of employers that will respond in everyone's unique way, because an employer can only pay what he can pay, what he can afford, and what he wants to pay. So, and you cannot determine the outcome of a thing. But the point is, we know that with an unemployment rate of unofficially above 40%, you pay somebody a minimum wage. That minimum wage is not only for that person, but for an extended household. What we need in South Africa is really to consider the wisdom behind a minimum wage. Because the moment you fall out of work, you lose your job, what do you have? You will earn you're going from 4,000 if the employer can afford it, or absent that, you will get 350 as a grant somewhere. So, the wisdom, the thing of a minimum wage is a dangerous thing. The moment what we say is with a minimum wage, here's an employee, either pay him that or he's unemployed. And
However,
that's
yeah,
yeah.
the issue then obviously of exploitation comes into play here, does it not? because there are those employers who can afford to pay a decent living wage, and they could then hide behind the minimum wage standard and then say, well, the minimum wage is X, I can only afford to, or I'm only going to pay you the minimum wage. And let's also be honest. I mean, I am an employer of domestic help as well. And they do work a full day, they do work hard, and I do know, farm workers, gardeners, and domestic workers do get definitely get exploited because we hide behind this minimum wage of maybe 23 rand 19 per hour. Or perhaps, as you've indicated, 4,000 rands a month. Other people also argue that, well, my domestic or my gardener lives on my property, is provided with accommodation, 3 meals a day, etc., etc., and that alone equates to maybe another 4,000 rands a month. And we do and have to take that into the equation as well. But what I am asking is the issue around exploitation.
Julie, there's no doubt that there are employers that's exploiting this. I mean, as an employer, I know that. As I say, I know that, of course, it will be the case. But, a good employer, there are good employers, and then perhaps of course, there are there's good employers, but uh, there will be exploitation. But we need to weigh this up. A good employer pays well. The heart of an employer is to pay his people well. To pay salary is a joyful incident, event, occurrence. It is good to see employees prosper. It is a privilege to share in your wealth. That is a good employer, and that these are also thriving employers because they
Mm,
attract the best in the market. Are there employers that is abusing it? No doubt. Um, so, but if you have a situation where you have less unemployment in a country, where there's a growing economy, wealthy employers, that is the ideal situation, will compete with other employers for the best employees. And that's when employees becomes an asset also unto themselves, where they say, I'm a good employee, I will compete and I will use my skill and my attitude to get a good salary. That is the ideal situation. Now, we're not in an ideal situation, and
mm,
I'm not suggesting we're going to get there because we're already now in the philosophy of and the approach and ideology of the minimum wage, and we're not going to escape that. So that is a fact. But all I'm saying, and that is what we need to caution the government about, is remember this: you can make the minimum wage whatever you want to. The But will happen immediately. The employer will ask himself the question: can I afford to pay this? Now, good employers, those that pay beyond that, that is not even an issue. So that is the thing that we must be careful about. And what we don't know, and I cannot answer that also, is what is the impact of them on what to what extent is the minimum wage contributing towards our high minimum, towards our high unemployment rate, and definitely not all of it, but maybe a portion of that, because there are many things that contribute towards unemployment and high unemployment. You see, we're talking about South Africa as a country with a very high inequality status between the rich and the poor. But minimum wage do not reduce that. What reduces that is more people working, a very low unemployment rate, a prospering nation. That reduces that. So, um, but that is an entirely new approach, which we're not going to have in the near future.
And of course, we also need to take into account that we have a very large unskilled population. And if they are not absorbed into the workforce, whether on farms, households, or other, low skilled jobs, we are going to continue on this trajectory of huge unemployment in the country. That being said, let's understand, number one, how we move forward and what is it that the National Employers Association of South Africa um, uh, involved in. How do you ease the plight, or what is it that you're doing to support the issues around unemployment and the rights possibly of employees or employers?
We have our constituency is business. So what do? First of all, we have a thriving youth development program where we take people that is completed either school or qualifications beyond school uh, uh, and diplomas. We place them on schemes with the sector educational training authorities at our employers for periods of up to 18 months, where the SETA, government and others, pay a portion of that salary, and the employer can top it up. What happens with that is that that person, with little cost to the employer initially, we place them at our employers, and the employer have the opportunity to get to know this employee. And many of them then after a year or 18 months gets continued employment with that employer. Many of them have never had the experience of exposure to the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of our schemes. Then we have another project regarding sustainable food production, where we teach people how to grow their own vegetables to sustain themselves. We've got the entrepreneurs program. All these things we involve employers as mentors, and we use the finances of our businesses to train in prospective people in entrepreneurship. So that is very successful. Our sustainable food production project is becoming better and better. So from our side, we're using the finances and the mentoring abilities of business to help those that do not find employment, to teach them how to grow their own food. Every meter in every township that is available is an opportunity for our own little farm. And
Absolutely.
We try to bring that approach and say, listen, you can look after yourself. And apart from that, you can use what you grow and sell it, become an entrepreneur. So these programs are interlinked, and our hope is, and our ideal is that we will utilize and involve each and every employer in South Africa in all of these programs.
What's the criteria for young people to qualify to be on your program? Any one of those programs that you're alluding to?
Well, any employee can qualify. If you have in all of these programs, because the state recognize programs, if you have a standard 8, if you're below 30 years old, anyone can qualify. Anyone.
Okay, so the age is the criteria there. You have to be below 30. Going back to...
That is for the youth. That is for youth. For the youth.
Do you have any adult programs that are in place?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Not at the moment.
All right. Regarding the minimum wage issue, yes, and the issue around the mechanization of farmers, because they might reach a point where they believe that they can't be paying 1,000 workers the extra money as per the requirements of the minimum wage. That would be a threat to a further threat or a further setback for unemployed people, very especially people who work on farms. That's number one. And number two, how do we move forward targeting this very vulnerable group of unskilled labor, that is gardeners, farm workers, and domestic workers?
Well, this is what you dealing with here, Julie, is the crux of the problem. Fortunately, employers understand that. You know, if you talk to an employer and you say, let's use an example. I say, for 6 months in a year, when you harvest grapes, for instance, you need 1,000 workers for 6 months in a year. This is an example. And you say it's going to cost you 400,000 rand more per month. That means 2.4 million rand for 6 months. It becomes very attractive to say, okay, look, I'm going to mechanize this thing. But I know that employers say, my first choice is to accommodate workers. And even if there's a bit of even if you're a little bit financially worse off, they choose that. But what is important here is that workers need to understand, if you use workers during harvesting time, and there's strikes and that kind of thing, then that pushes the balance towards let's mechanize. Workers need to understand by not being reliable during harvesting time is really endangering jobs in the long run. You know, there were days 20 years back, you would see manufacturing stores where storehouses where 1,000 employees work. Today, there's 30 people working there because they price and stuff is important. So there's a lot of things that is required to sustain employment, of which skill and attitude is very important. But any employer will say, if good skills, good attitude, and my activity isn't disrupted, I prefer utilizing hand labor workers, because employers understand not doing that will create a socio-economic crisis in this country and instability that will threaten the future of this country.
Okay, we seem to be in a catch-22 situation here regarding minimum wages, and obviously the Department of Labor suggesting that we should introduce minimum wages to prevent exploitation. If and when this does, if and when it's legislated, what sort of impact is it going to have on this sector of the economy, farmers, householders, etc.?
Well, that's the thing that we don't know. And it's, once again, what will the impact be? We're not sure. And what is the contribution of the minimum wage towards the unemployment rate? And I'm not sure whether the guys that's doing the commission that's determining this are very, very honest about it. You see, they are caught up in this ideological approach that there needs to be a minimum wage. They cannot disclose the full impact. They cannot say, look, we need to have a minimum wage, but it is having a devastating impact on the unemployment. I think they were holding the true information on that because they're caught up. They need to justify it. I think we do not have the right information there. But you know what? The thing is, what's happening here is, you know, when a company retrench 1,000 workers, it's news. It's big news. But what is not reported is the guy that has 10 employees and retrench one person to make it 9. But that's 1,000 companies. That's not news. Also 1,000 employees, but working for 1,000 companies, that's not news. If it happens with one company, it's big news. And this is the slow drain on unemployment in South Africa is all these measures, red tape, wages. And I say wages is just one of the issues. That's one of these issues. Where government interfere in employment, it makes employment less attractive. And there are many things that's playing into this area. So what is causing this leakage in terms of employment? And as I said, there are many issues. That's a debate. But government is not honest about it. If you establish a commission, say, let's just find out from employers exactly why did you have 25 employees 5 years ago and why do you only have 6? And you take that history over 10 years And you see, it didn't happen at once. It happened bit by bit.
Okay, that's where we're going to have to leave it. And all I can say on the matter is that it's really about your conscience. If you have unskilled labor in your employ, then let your conscience be the compass. Do the right thing by the people who work for you, who truly give of their sweat and blood. But undoubtedly, this is something that I don't think government's going to forget about. It will keep coming up from time to time, and we're just going to have to keep an eye on this issue. Chief Executive of NEASA, Mr. Gerard Papentjes, thank you indeed for your input on the question of the proposed increase of the minimum wage in South Africa. Go well, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julie.
8:28 exactly, news and views on Salam Media. And in a minute or two, we're going to be talking with Sizwe Pamla, the national spokesperson for COSATU.